On a frozen winter night, a young mother sat outside a restaurant trying to sell her last hope, a tiny puppy, while her baby lay weak in the cold. People walked past, warm food, bright lights. No one stopped. Until a retired Navy SEAL slowed his car and listened. What he discovered in that old handcart would pull him into a fight far bigger than kindness, one involving danger, truth, and a choice that could not be undone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Michael Harris had learned to live inside routines because routines didn't ask questions. They didn't remind him of what used to be or what never came back. At 45, retired from the Navy SEALs and living alone on the edge of Spokane, he measured days by simple markers: the bitterness of his morning coffee, the sound of tires on frozen asphalt, the way winter light faded too early. He told himself he preferred the quiet. Silence was predictable. Silence didn't need explanations. That afternoon, the snow came down heavier than forecasted. Michael drove without destination, a habit he'd developed after retirement. Movement without purpose felt safer than stillness. The truck's heater hummed softly, fighting the cold that pressed against the glass like a living thing. In the passenger seat, his dog shifted slightly. The presence was familiar, grounding. The dog did not demand conversation or reassurance. It simply was, alert, in a way Michael recognized instinctively, loyalty without questions, a mirror of the man Michael used to be. Michael's thoughts drifted, as they often did, toward the past he refused to name directly. Years of command, of responsibility measured in seconds and consequences. Back then, stopping had been an order, not a choice. Now, stopping felt heavier, personal, voluntary, and dangerous in a different way. He slowed at a red light near a small diner, still glowing warmly against the gray afternoon. Steam fogged its windows. Inside, people laughed, lifted forks, complained about the cold, as if it were an inconvenience rather than a verdict. That was when he saw her. She sat just outside the entrance, tucked against the brick wall like an afterthought. A young woman, thin beneath a worn coat, shoulders curved inward as if apologizing for taking up space. In her arms she held a small puppy, barely old enough to understand the world it had been born into. At her feet, positioned carefully as if to shield it from the wind, stood an old metal handcart. Inside the cart lay a baby. Michael's foot hovered above the accelerator. The light had turned green. "Don't," a familiar voice inside him warned. The voice of experience, the voice that had learned the cost of caring too much. He had passed scenes like this before, different faces, same quiet desperation. He had told himself that stopping once would never be enough, that the world would not shrink simply because he decided to notice it. The truck behind him honked. Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched. For a brief moment, anger flared, not at the woman, not at the baby, but at the demand this moment placed on him. He had not asked for another decision that mattered. The dog in the passenger seat shifted again, not restless, focused. Michael exhaled slowly and pulled over. The engine idled as snow gathered along the tires. He sat there longer than necessary, as if waiting for the moment to pass on its own. It didn't. The woman didn't look up. She didn't wave. She didn't beg. Her gaze remained fixed on the baby in the cart, one hand adjusting a thin blanket against the wind. That, more than anything, undid him. Michael stepped out into the cold. The air cut sharply, immediate, and honest. His boots sank slightly into fresh snow as he crossed the short distance. The dog followed, positioning itself without instruction, between Michael and the open street, eyes scanning, posture calm, but ready. The woman finally noticed them. Her expression shifted, not hope, not fear, but something practiced, caution. She tightened her hold on the puppy instinctively. "I'm not here to—" Michael began, then stopped. He hated how easily words failed when they mattered. "Is the baby okay?" The question surprised her. She blinked, as if she hadn't expected it. Her voice, when it came, was soft and controlled. "She's sick." That was all. No elaboration, no dramatics. Michael crouched slightly, angling himself toward the handcart. He didn't touch it yet. The baby inside was too still. Not sleeping still, but other. The kind of stillness that made his chest tighten. "How old?" he asked. 3 months. The woman swallowed. "Her name's Lily." The puppy whimpered faintly, sensing the shift in tension. Michael noticed how the woman stroked its back absent-mindedly, a reflexive comfort she could offer something when she had so little to give herself. "I'm selling him," she said, lifting the puppy slightly. "He's 2 months, healthy. Someone will want him." Michael heard the words but understood the truth underneath. This was not a sale. It was a sacrifice. His mind raced through assessments he hadn't needed in years: temperature, exposure, response time. He knew what happened when infants stayed cold too long. He knew what waiting did. He also knew what stepping in would mean. If he took responsibility now, he couldn't half do it. There was no clean exit once he crossed that line. He would have to follow through wherever it led. Hospital rooms, questions, complications he had spent years avoiding. "You're not on duty anymore," the inner voice argued. "This isn't your mission." Michael looked at Lily again. Her chest rose shallowly, irregular. The dog stepped closer to the cart, lowering its head, not touching, just acknowledging. A quiet promise without ceremony. Michael felt something shift inside him. Not heroism, not obligation, something older and heavier. The refusal to walk away. "Where have you been staying?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then answered, "Wherever it's dry." Michael nodded once. The decision settled into him like a weight rediscovered, familiar, unwelcome, necessary. "We need to get her warm," he said. "Now." The woman's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for conditions. She found none, only resolve and something like fatigue. "Okay," she whispered. As Michael reached for the cart, snow continued to fall, indifferent to the choice just made. Inside the diner, someone laughed loudly. A bell chimed as the door opened and closed. Outside, a retired soldier, a sick child, a young mother, and a dog stood at the edge of winter. No promises made, but a line crossed that could not be undone. Michael Harris had stopped, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't regret it. Michael Harris did not rush. He knew better than to confuse urgency with panic. Panic wasted time, and time was the one thing the baby in the handcart did not have. He pushed the cart toward his truck with steady hands, aware of the woman following close behind, the puppy pressed against her chest as if it were a second heartbeat. Inside his head, calculations lined up automatically, old training asserting itself without permission. Distance to the nearest hospital, traffic conditions, how quickly a small body lost heat. He did not say any of it out loud. Speaking would turn this into something fragile, and he needed it solid. When he lifted the cart's edge to guide it into the truck bed, he felt the weight, not just of metal and a child, but of consequence. This was no longer a moment of kindness. This was a choice with momentum. The dog circled once, then settled near the rear door, senses attuned to more than sound. Michael recognized the posture immediately. Not fear, vigilance, the kind that came from having learned, once, that danger did not always announce itself loudly. He glanced back toward the diner. People continued to move in and out, unaware that a line had just been crossed in the snow a few steps from their warmth. Emily climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the puppy as if afraid the world might take it from her next. Michael started the engine and felt the familiar vibration settle his thoughts. As the truck pulled away, he noticed his reflection in the windshield, older than he remembered, eyes carrying the weight of unfinished duty. He told himself this was temporary. Get the baby warm, get medical help, then step back. That was the plan, simple and contained, the kind of plan he trusted. Yet even as he formed it, another part of him pushed back, quieter but insistent. Plans had never survived contact with real people. Lily whimpered faintly, a sound barely audible beneath the engine, but Michael heard it anyway. His jaw tightened. He adjusted the heat higher than usual, ignoring the sting in his own fingers. Emily spoke once, her voice barely more than breath, thanking him. Michael nodded, but did not answer. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. It implied heroism, and he did not feel heroic. He felt trapped between who he had been trained to be and who he had tried to become after leaving service. The road curved toward the river, traffic thinning as daylight faded. The dog shifted again, eyes fixed on the darkening side streets, memory and instinct braided together in its silence. Michael thought about the years after retirement, how he had told himself that choosing solitude was the same as choosing peace. He had been wrong. Solitude was easy. Responsibility was not. Responsibility followed you home, stayed awake with you, waited patiently for moments like this to test whether you still meant what you once swore. Emily glanced back toward the truck bed, anxiety tightening her posture. Michael understood without explanation. He slowed slightly, careful with the turns, every movement deliberate. His mind flickered to a winter years ago, a different kind of cold, a different kind of small body wrapped in emergency foil, the weight of a life depending on steady hands. He had succeeded then. Others had not. The memory burned and steadied him at the same time. They were 3 blocks from the main road when the dog's attention sharpened further, an almost imperceptible shift that sent a ripple through Michael's nerves. He did not look back immediately. He waited, counted breaths, trusted the signal rather than reacting to it. A car had appeared behind them, headlights low, following at a distance that was neither aggressive nor accidental. Michael felt the familiar tightening along his spine, not fear, recognition. He adjusted his speed, watching the car mirror his movements. Emily noticed the change in his posture and stiffened, her hand tightening around the puppy. Michael kept his voice calm when he finally spoke. He told her everything was fine, because panic would serve no one, but inside, the careful boundaries he had drawn for this intervention began to dissolve. This was no longer just about warmth and medicine. The world had a way of complicating good intentions. The dog did not growl or bark. It simply watched, memory guiding instinct, understanding shaped by a past where threats rarely looked the way people expected them to. Michael took a turn toward the hospital route, testing whether the car would continue to follow. It did. His mind accelerated, weighing options he had hoped never to need again. He had left that life behind, but it had not left him. He did not yet know who was in the car or why, and he did not need to. What mattered was the baby, the woman beside him, and the choice he had already made. As the hospital lights appeared faintly in the distance, blurred by falling snow, Michael felt the weight of inevitability settle in. He could no longer pretend this was a simple detour on a winter afternoon. Whatever waited ahead would demand more than a ride and a warm engine. It would demand that he decide once again how far he was willing to go. Michael Harris pulled into the emergency entrance with a precision that felt automatic, muscle memory guiding his hands even as his thoughts raced ahead of him. Tires crunched, the engine idled, and for a brief second he remained still, listening to the uneven rhythm of Lily's breathing from the back of the truck. He knew that sound now. It was not panic that tightened his chest, but recognition. Recognition that the margin for error was gone. He moved quickly, opening the door, lifting the handcart with care that bordered on reverence. Emily followed, her steps unsure on the slick pavement, eyes wide and fixed on her daughter, as if distance alone might steal her away. The dog stayed close, not crowding, not hesitating. Its awareness stretched thin between the human urgency and something less defined, something that had been pressing at its instincts since the diner. Inside, the hospital air was warmer, but carried its own kind of heaviness, sharp with disinfectant and expectation. A nurse intercepted them, questions rapid and efficient, her voice trained to stay level, no matter what arrived through those doors. Michael answered calmly, offering only what mattered. 3 months. Cold exposure. Minimal intake. Emily's words tangled as she tried to add more, fear eroding structure, but Michael anchored the exchange, grounding it in facts. He felt the familiar shift as the staff took over, hands replacing his. The baby lifted and wheeled away under bright lights that did not soften anything. Emily stood frozen, torn between following and collapsing. Michael placed a steady hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward without explanation. He had done this before, countless times, but never with a life so small and fragile. As the doors closed behind Lily, a quiet followed, abrupt and disorienting. Michael became acutely aware of his own breathing, the stiffness in his joints, the way his body still held readiness even when there was nothing immediate to act upon. The dog sat beside him, posture composed, eyes fixed on the corridor, sensing the unresolved nature of the moment. Loyalty, Michael knew, was not just about staying. It was about waiting without distraction. A doctor appeared, brief and direct, explaining hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition. Words Michael understood too well. The doctor spoke of time frames and responses, of what they were doing now and what they hoped to see. Hope was presented cautiously, measured in percentages and observations. Michael nodded, absorbing each detail, while Emily folded inward beside him, her hands clasped tight enough to tremble. When the doctor left, silence returned, heavier than before. Michael felt the urge to speak, to reassure, to promise outcomes he could not control. He resisted it. He had learned the damage empty assurances could do. Instead, he stayed present, an anchor without guarantees. Minutes stretched. Snow brushed against the windows, indifferent to the drama unfolding inside. Michael's thoughts drifted backward, uninvited, to another winter, another hospital, another waiting room where he had once stood in uniform, boots still wet, hands smelling of smoke and blood, listening to a medic explain why a life had slipped away despite everything done right. That memory had followed him into retirement, whispering that effort did not always equal salvation. He wondered now if stopping that afternoon had been an act of defiance against that truth or an acceptance of it. The dog shifted subtly, attention sharpening. Michael felt it before he saw it, a tightening in the air, a disturbance that had nothing to do with the sterile calm of the hospital. He glanced toward the glass doors leading back outside. Through the falling snow, a familiar pair of headlights lingered longer than necessary before moving on. The realization settled quietly, without drama. Whatever had followed them had not simply vanished. It had adapted. Michael's jaw tightened. He had hoped the hospital would be a boundary, a place where intentions mattered more than interference. Hope, he reminded himself, was not a plan. Emily noticed his change in posture, fear flaring again in her eyes. He met her gaze and gave a small nod, a silent promise of awareness rather than reassurance. The dog remained still, but Michael could feel the vigilance radiating from it, shaped by a past where danger had often worn ordinary faces. Hours passed in fragments. A nurse returned with updates, small improvements, cautious optimism. Lily was warmer now, stable for the moment. Emily wept then, quietly, her shoulders shaking as relief and exhaustion collided. Michael stood apart, allowing her that release while guarding the edges of the moment. He understood how fragile relief could be. When Emily finally looked up, gratitude shone openly in her expression, raw and unfiltered. Michael felt it press against him, heavy with expectation, and instinctively stepped back from it, not physically, but internally. He did not want to be the center of this story. He wanted the child to live. That was all. Yet even as he framed the thought, he recognized its inadequacy. Survival was never the end of a story. It was the beginning of complications, paperwork, questions, consequences, the kind that followed people like Emily long after hospital doors closed, the kind Michael had avoided since leaving service, believing that disengagement was the same as peace. The dog rose and moved closer to him, a quiet gesture that grounded his spiraling thoughts. Michael rested his hand briefly against its neck, drawing steadiness from the contact. He did not know how far this would go, but he knew now that he was already past the point of minimal involvement. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing tracks, disguising intentions. Somewhere beyond the glass and light, something watched and waited. Michael Harris stood in the corridor between outcomes, aware that the truth revealed in that handcart had altered more than one life, and that the choice to stop had set forces in motion he could no longer pretend were simple. Michael Harris did not leave the hospital immediately. He stood just beyond the automatic doors, letting the cold recalibrate him, breath fogging, as his thoughts aligned into something sharper than worry. Inside, Lily was stable for now. That fact alone felt unreal, like a fragile truce rather than a victory. He understood stability the way soldiers did, temporary, conditional, always subject to change. Emily sat somewhere behind him now, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, clinging to updates as if repetition might anchor them. Michael needed distance from that room not because he didn't care, but because caring without control had always been dangerous for him. The dog stood at his side, still and attentive, its presence less about protection and more about confirmation. It remembered what Michael remembered, even if in a different language. The memory of headlights lingering outside the glass replayed in Michael's mind, refusing to settle. He scanned the parking lot deliberately, cataloging vehicles, movement, patterns. Most were ordinary, tired people coming and going under fluorescent lights. One car, however, idled too long near the far edge, engine running despite the cold, headlights off, but body angled toward the entrance. Michael did not stare. He had learned long ago that attention could be an invitation. Instead, he adjusted his stance slightly, placing himself between the doors and the lot, not blocking, simply existing as an obstacle that would have to be acknowledged. The dog sensed the shift immediately, posture tightening in quiet agreement. Michael's thoughts turned inward, not toward fear, but toward responsibility. He had brought Emily and Lily here. That meant whatever followed was no longer incidental. He could walk away now, let hospital security and systems absorb the situation, retreat into the anonymity he had curated for years. The option existed. That was what made it heavy. Walking away had always been easier after the uniform came off. No debriefs, no accountability beyond his own sleep. But the image of the handcart outside the diner surfaced again, the way Lily's breath had barely stirred the thin blanket. Systems had not caught her then. They would not necessarily catch her later. Michael felt the familiar internal pull, the one he had hoped retirement would quiet, the urge to define the perimeter himself. A man stepped out of the idling car. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, as if he belonged to the night. He did not wear anything that marked him as a threat. That was precisely the problem. He glanced toward the hospital doors, then toward Michael, measuring distance and posture with subtlety that felt practiced. Michael's pulse slowed rather than spiked. Recognition again, not fear. He had seen this kind of assessment before, in places far from Spokane, in moments where intentions hid behind ordinary questions. The man took a few steps closer, stopping well short of confrontation. "Cold night," he said, voice carrying easily. It was an opening, not a comment. Michael nodded once, offering nothing more. Silence stretched. The dog did not move, did not growl. It simply watched, memory guiding instinct, understanding that noise was unnecessary. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the animal, then back to Michael. "Everything all right inside?" he asked, as if concern were the most natural thing in the world. Michael considered the question carefully. Words mattered here, not because they would be believed, but because they would be remembered. "It is now," he replied. The man smiled faintly, a gesture that did not reach his eyes. "Good to hear." Another pause. Snow drifted between them, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they formed. The parking lot felt suddenly too open, the hospital lights too harsh. Michael sensed Emily watching from inside, uncertainty tightening her posture, even if she could not hear the exchange. He needed to end this without escalation, without drawing lines that could not be erased. "You waiting for someone?" Michael asked. The question was neutral, but it shifted the balance, forcing explanation rather than invitation. The man hesitated for the first time, just a fraction of a second. "Just passing through," he said. "Didn't mean to intrude." He took a step back. Michael did not move. He understood the importance of that stillness. Eventually, the man returned to his car, started the engine, and drove away slowly, tires crunching against snow with deliberate care. Michael waited until the taillights disappeared before releasing the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The dog relaxed slightly, but the vigilance did not fully leave. It never did once something had been identified. Michael went back inside, the warmth hitting him with delayed force. Emily looked up immediately, questions crowding her expression. He shook his head gently, a silent reassurance that cost him more than he expected. "We're okay," he said. It was true in the narrowest sense. Later, when updates slowed and the night deepened, Michael sat alone in the waiting area, hands clasped loosely, eyes fixed on nothing. He thought about patterns, about why someone would take interest in a woman selling a puppy and a sick infant. He thought about employers, liabilities, stories best kept small. He did not jump to conclusions. He had learned the danger of that too. But he trusted instinct shaped by experience, and instinct told him this was not coincidence. When a nurse finally told him Lily would be monitored through the night, Michael felt relief settle in layers rather than all at once. Emily thanked him again, tears returning, exhaustion overtaking caution. Michael accepted it this time, not because he wanted it, but because denying it felt dishonest. As Emily rested, he stepped back into the corridor, the dog following without command. He knew sleep would not come easily tonight. He also knew that whatever had brushed against them in the parking lot would not simply disappear. It would adjust, wait, perhaps return in a different shape. Michael Harris leaned against the cold wall, listening to the muted sounds of the hospital, aware that the line he had crossed outside the diner was now firmly behind him. The question was no longer whether he would stay involved, but how far that involvement would have to go before the truth stopped hiding in plain sight. Michael Harris measured time differently now, not in minutes or hours, but in breaths, in monitors flickering behind closed doors, in the space between footsteps echoing down sterile corridors. Morning light filtered through narrow windows, yet it brought no warmth, only clarity. Lily had survived the night. That was the phrase the nurse used. Survived. Not recovered. Not safe. Just still here. Michael absorbed it quietly, the way he had learned to receive reports that balanced relief against restraint. He sat upright in a plastic chair that bit into his back, posture disciplined out of habit rather than comfort. Emily slept curled on her side nearby, exhaustion finally overpowering fear, her arms folded as if still shielding her child even in rest. Michael watched her breathe, steady but shallow, and felt the familiar tension of responsibility press against him again. He had not planned to stay this long. He had not planned anything beyond getting them through the doors. Yet here he was, guarding a quiet corner of a hospital, as if it were a perimeter in hostile territory. The dog lay at his feet, eyes half closed but awareness intact, resting without surrender. Michael understood that state well. It was how he slept for years, even after retirement, listening for threats that rarely came but never truly disappeared. Nurses passed occasionally, offering updates without ceremony. Lily was warmer now, fluids were helping, tests were pending. Each sentence carried both hope and warning. Michael nodded, thanked them, stored the information without comment. Inside, something shifted each time Lily's name was spoken, tightening and loosening in uneven rhythm. He told himself that emotional distance was still possible, that this did not have to become personal. The lie sat poorly. It always had. At mid-morning, a social worker appeared, polite and careful, asking questions that skirted the edges of legality and circumstance. Where had Emily been staying? Did she have identification? Was there family nearby? Michael listened, intervening only when Emily's fatigue turned answers fragile. He did not offer explanations, only context. The social worker took notes, nodding, eyes soft but professional. Systems moved slowly, Michael knew. They always had, sometimes too slowly. He felt the familiar urge to accelerate, to bypass procedure the way he once bypassed bureaucracy in the field. He restrained it. This was not his world anymore, or so he told himself. When Emily woke, confusion flared briefly before memory returned. She asked about Lily immediately. Michael answered before the nurse could, choosing words that balanced truth with steadiness. Emily cried then, quietly, relief breaking through the accumulated fear of weeks. Michael looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect. Grief and relief were private terrain. He had learned that the hard way. As the morning wore on, Michael's thoughts returned to the night before, to the man in the parking lot, to the sense of attention that had lingered even after the car drove away. He replayed the interaction repeatedly, searching for details he might have missed. Tone, timing, the way the man had looked past him, rather than at him, as if assessing the situation rather than the person. Michael knew that look. It belonged to people who operated behind outcomes, not within them. He wondered who had noticed Emily first, who had decided her situation mattered only if it became visible. The idea unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Lily's condition drew resources, paperwork, questions. Visibility brought scrutiny, and scrutiny threatened interests that preferred darkness. The dog stirred, lifting its head as if responding to Michael's unspoken tension. Michael rested his foot lightly against it, grounding himself in the present. He reminded himself that speculation without evidence was noise. Focus on what was real. Lily breathing, Emily eating soup from a paper cup with shaking hands, the slow accumulation of stability. Late morning brought another update. Lily would remain under observation. No discharge today. Maybe not tomorrow. The doctor spoke of follow-ups, of nutrition plans, of monitoring. Michael heard the subtext clearly. This was only the beginning. Survival did not resolve vulnerability. It exposed it. Emily asked quietly what would happen next. Michael considered the question longer than necessary. He could walk away after today. He could tell himself he had done enough. The system would take over, or it would not. That had always been the gamble. He felt the old conflict rise again, sharp and familiar. He had left the teams because he believed he was done paying that price. Yet the price had followed him into civilian life, demanding payment in different currency. One step at a time, he said finally. It was the only honest answer he had. Emily nodded, trusting him more than he deserved, and that trust settled on his shoulders with uncomfortable weight. Outside, snow continued to fall lightly, almost peacefully, disguising the edges of the city. Michael stood at the window for a moment, watching people arrive and leave, unaware of the fragile battles unfolding inside. He thought about patterns again, about how easily people slipped through gaps until someone noticed. He had noticed. That was the problem. The dog rose and stood beside him, gaze following his. Michael recognized the mirrored vigilance and felt a strange sense of alignment. He was not alone in this, even if he wished he were. As afternoon approached, a nurse mentioned paperwork waiting downstairs, forms that required signatures, decisions that could not be deferred. Michael nodded, already anticipating the next layer of involvement. He knew then, with quiet certainty, that whatever forces had brushed against them last night would not remain content with distance. Systems rarely liked interference. Neither did people who benefited from them. Michael Harris straightened, drawing on habits he thought he had set aside. Chapter by chapter, decision by decision, the distance between who he was and who he had tried to become narrowed again. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, someone was likely deciding their next move. Michael Harris did not wear his past on the outside as he entered the office building, yet it moved with him, shaping his posture and the calm precision of his steps. The lobby was warm, polished, and deliberately impersonal, designed to make discomfort feel temporary and responsibility feel abstract. He gave his name at the desk, voice steady, offering no explanation beyond the request to speak with someone authorized to discuss a former employee. The receptionist hesitated, then made a call, her tone changing when the name Emily Wilson surfaced. Michael noticed that shift and filed it away. Waiting rooms had taught him that small changes often revealed more than direct answers. The dog remained close, quiet, aware that this space carried a different kind of threat, one shaped by language and leverage rather than force. Michael felt the old discipline settle in, the one that kept emotion from spilling into motion. He reminded himself that this was not an ambush and not a battlefield, even if it felt like a contested zone. A conference room followed, glass walls overlooking streets softened by falling snow, and inside it sat two people who introduced themselves with practiced neutrality, a senior operations manager and a legal advisor. Their names mattered less than their roles. They asked Michael to sit. He did not. He placed a thin folder on the table instead, careful and deliberate, the way he once placed evidence after an operation. Inside were copies of employment records, termination notices, hospital intake summaries, dates aligned into a narrative that did not require embellishment. He watched their eyes move as they scanned the documents, watched the subtle recalculations begin. Michael spoke without raising his voice, explaining only what needed explanation. Emily had worked nights. Emily had been dismissed while pregnant. Emily had no benefits, no severance, no follow-up. Her child had nearly died of cold and hunger. He did not accuse, he described. The difference mattered. The legal advisor responded first, measured and cautious, outlining policies, contingencies, procedures, followed as written. Michael listened without interruption, recognizing the language as another form of perimeter, one designed to keep responsibility outside. When she finished, he nodded once. He did not argue law, he spoke of outcomes, of how policies that met minimum standards still produced maximum harm, of how a child's survival should not depend on chance encounters outside a diner. The operations manager shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward the glass, perhaps imagining headlines or audits or questions that did not stay contained. Michael felt the familiar pull to push harder, to accelerate the exchange the way he once accelerated decisions under fire. He resisted it. Pressure applied too quickly invited resistance. The dog lay down at his feet, a quiet assertion of presence that anchored Michael's thoughts. He thought of Lily's uneven breathing, of Emily's shaking hands, of the night the headlights lingered too long. He realized then that this meeting was not just about remedy, but about interruption, about breaking a chain before it reformed. The legal advisor asked what Michael wanted. The question landed heavier than intended. Michael considered it carefully. He wanted medical coverage for Lily, immediate and ongoing. He wanted back pay and emergency support for Emily. He wanted a review that ensured pregnancy and illness would not become silent triggers for dismissal. He did not threaten publicity or litigation, though both hovered in the room unspoken. He simply stated that these outcomes would align the company's actions with the reality it had helped create. Silence followed, long enough to be uncomfortable. Michael recognized the moment where calculation met conscience. The operations manager spoke then, acknowledging exposure, suggesting a path forward that sounded like compromise, but functioned as correction. The legal advisor added conditions, timelines, documentation. Michael agreed to what mattered and declined what diluted accountability. He felt the weight of the exchange settle into something solid, imperfect but real. When they stood to conclude, the operations manager extended a hand. Michael took it briefly, without warmth or hostility. The dog rose as well, sensing the shift, understanding that the immediate objective had been met, but the environment remained unstable. As Michael left the building, cold air reclaimed him, sharper than before. He paused on the steps, not to savor victory, but to assess the terrain ahead. He knew compliance could be rescinded, delayed, reframed. Systems adapted when pressed. The question was whether pressure would persist. He thought again of the man in the parking lot, of attention drawn by visibility. He understood now that making this right would invite scrutiny from more than one direction. Inside, Emily and Lily waited, unaware of the negotiations conducted on their behalf, trusting outcomes they could not see. Michael accepted that trust as a responsibility rather than a compliment. He walked toward his truck with measured steps, the dog at his side, both carrying the quiet understanding that resolution on paper rarely ended stories like this. Somewhere, someone would be weighing costs and responses, deciding how to reassert control. Michael Harris did not know what form that would take, only that it would arrive sooner rather than later. Michael Harris stood outside the temporary housing unit, arranged through emergency outreach, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, breathing in air that felt different from the night before, not warmer, but less hostile. The building behind him was modest, functional, the sort of place designed not to inspire hope, but to stabilize it, and he recognized the value of that immediately. Stability had saved more lives than optimism ever had. The dog waited beside him, posture relaxed, yet attentive, no longer scanning for threats, but not forgetting them either. Michael understood that balance well. Inside, Emily moved carefully, adjusting to space that did not collapse inward, to a room that did not require vigilance at every sound. Lily slept in a borrowed crib nearby, her breathing steady now, no longer a question mark, but a quiet rhythm that anchored the room. When Michael had visited earlier that morning, a nurse from the hospital had stopped by briefly, explaining follow-up care, nutrition schedules, and the slow nature of recovery, reminding them all that survival was not an end point, but a process. Emily had listened closely, absorbing instructions with the same seriousness she had once reserved for simply getting through the day. Michael watched her then, noticing how quickly responsibility reshaped her posture when fear loosened its grip. He recognized that shift too. It was the moment when exhaustion met resolve and chose to keep going anyway. Outside now, Michael waited because he knew when not to intrude. He had spent much of his life entering rooms at the worst possible moments. This one belonged to Emily and Lily, not to him. When Emily finally stepped out, bundled against the cold, her eyes met his with something steadier than gratitude. It was recognition. Recognition that what he had done mattered not because it was extraordinary, but because it had been timely. She thanked him again, quietly, without drama, and Michael accepted it without deflection this time. He understood that refusing gratitude could be another form of distance, and distance no longer served anyone here. They spoke briefly about logistics, appointments, the paperwork that would follow, the kind of conversations that grounded hope in practical steps. Emily mentioned the puppy, now resting inside, warm and fed, no longer an object of exchange, but a constant presence that had witnessed the worst and survived it. Michael nodded, feeling a subtle sense of completion at that detail. The dog stirred at his side, sensing the easing of tension, the conclusion of a task that had demanded vigilance rather than force. Michael knelt briefly, resting his hand against its neck, acknowledging without ceremony the shared understanding between them. They had both carried this through without expectation of reward. That was enough. As Emily returned inside, Michael remained where he was, watching the door close softly behind her. He felt the familiar urge to linger, to ensure nothing would go wrong now that his involvement was winding down. He resisted it. Letting go was also a discipline. He thought back to the meeting downtown, to the way systems bent under pressure but never fully transformed. He knew the support arranged could unravel, could require reinforcement he might not be there to provide. Accepting that uncertainty was part of the cost of choosing to help without control. Michael turned toward his truck, the dog falling into step beside him, their movements synchronized without effort. Snow crunched underfoot, a sound that had once meant danger and now simply meant progress. As he drove away, the housing unit receded in the mirror, not erased, just placed properly in the past. Michael did not feel triumphant or redeemed. He felt quieter. The kind of quiet that came after action aligned with belief. He thought about the life he had built around solitude, about how carefully he had avoided attachments that asked something of him. He knew that pattern would not vanish overnight. But he also knew it had been disrupted, and that mattered. The city opened up ahead of him, streets pale with snow, ordinary and indifferent. Michael let the heater hum, let the road stretch, let the moment settle without analysis. For the first time since retirement, he did not feel the need to keep driving just to outrun thought. The dog rested, alert but at ease, carrying its own memories of cold nights and quiet watches. Michael Harris drove on, not toward another mission, but away from one completed, understanding at last that stopping had not taken something from him. It had returned something he had believed he was done carrying. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes God answers prayers quietly, through a stranger who stops, through a steady hand in the cold, through courage that chooses compassion over comfort. In our daily lives, we pass moments like this more often than we realize. People carrying burdens too heavy to be seen, hearts waiting for someone to notice. When we choose to pause, to listen, to act with love, we may become the miracle God sends to someone else. If this story moved you, let it remind you that kindness is never wasted and no act of mercy is too small. Please share this story so it can reach those who need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps, and may you always be the answer to a prayer you never heard spoken.